At the start of this year, we made 2 videos about the Holy Roman Empire in Crusader Kings 3. One of them was covering the Empire generally, including its most powerful components and characters. The second one, however, aimed to shed light on more minor characters within the Empire that were interesting historically. The HRE is such a vast empire which throughout its history encompassed a countless number of interesting duchies and dynasties, and many people in the comments of our previous video have suggested additional characters we should cover in the future. So we've decided to make one more video about the Holy Roman Empire's smaller characters, the counts and even courtiers that are historically relevant or are from dynasties that became important for European history in later centuries. We'll be trying to cover most of the characters that were mentioned in the comment section of that previous video, once again diving into the smallest components of the Holy Roman Empire. If there are any other CK3 characters from any other region you'd like us to cover in the future, let us know in the comments. We'd also like to start to branch out into other historical video games beyond Crusader Kings, so please let us know your favourite video games that have a historical setting, and we might cover it in the future. And as always, if you like our content, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel, it really helps us out. We also have a Patreon if you are able to support us further. Curiously, in the Duchy of Swabia in the southwest of today's Germany, there is quite a concentration of interesting dynasties that were to become important for Central Europe's later history. Before we go into detail about these counts and their great future, we realise we have also never talked about the feudal leader of this dynasty, Rudolf of Rheinfelden, or Duke Rudolf of Swabia of the Rheinfelden dynasty, as he is called in the game. Rudolf was initially an ally of Salian Emperor Heinrich IV, as he was married to the older sister of Heinrich's Savoyan wife Bertha. However, he switched sides in the 1070s and even was elected German anti-king in 1077, which marked the outbreak of the Great Saxon Revolt and the first phase of open conflict in the conflict between emperor and papacy. In the late 1070s, Rudolf and Emperor Heinrich fought a series of hard battles until October 1080, when they met in a final brutal fight in the Battle of Elster near Hohenmolsen in what is today eastern Germany, south of Leipzig. Although the Swabian anti-king's forces won a decisive victory, Rudolf was so badly wounded during the battle by one of the emperor's knights that he died the very next day, ending his aspirations as the German anti-king. In his younger years, and during the reign of Heinrich IV's father, Heinrich III, Rudolf had also been the administrator of Burgundy. This connection to Burgundy is unfortunately missing in the game, as well as the large possessions in the Black Forest the Rheinfelden dynasty reportedly had. In general, it would have been fitting for Paradox to give this character a more powerful starting position than the small domain he holds in the game, since had he not been killed in 1080, he could have had a great future lying ahead of him. In the south of Rudolf's Duchy of Swabia, you can find one of the aforementioned counts whose family was to become very significant in later centuries. Count Frederick III of Ravensburg, of the Hohenstaufen dynasty. Frederick III is just 18 years old at the 1066 starting date. However, by ruling 2 strong counties, he can already be considered a threat to his feudal lord, the Duke of Swabia. It is very hard to locate this character, and the early Hohenstaufens in general, in actual history, but there are some very clear discrepancies in Paradox's portrayal of the Hohenstaufen dynasty in Crusader Kings to what we actually know from historical records. Primary sources of the 11th century mention a Friedrich, his son and his grandson in the area, that very likely were the ancestors of what later became known as the Hohenstaufen dynasty. One of those Friedrichs was a Pfalzgraf, so a count, in Swabia from 1053 to 1069. So if this is the one, then it is a bit odd that he is only 18 years old in the game. What is also possible especially due to him being the third of his name, is that this is already supposed to be the grandson of the first known Hohenstaufen ancestor, a Swabian nobleman contemporary called Friedrich von Buren. His seat of power was the castle Buren, which was likely located near today's Göppingen, which lies north rather than south of Ulm, the duchy capital in the game in the 1066 start. So Friedrich Hohenstaufen, ruling Ravensburg and Groningen in the game, does not make sense from the information we could gather about the early Hohenstaufen history. The moment this dynasty gets less blurry in historical records is just over 10 years after the 1066 starting date, when in 1079 Emperor Heinrich IV, disappointed with the aforementioned Duke Rudolf of Rheinfelden, made son Frederick of the Stauffer dynasty the new Duke of Swabia, and betrothed him to his 7-year-old daughter Agnes. The marriage between the new Duke of Swabia to the Salian Agnes gave the future Stauffer heirs a vitally strong claim to be Holy Roman Emperors, which was crucial for European history in the centuries to come. That's why this moment is often considered the actual start of the famous dynasty of Hohenstaufen, with the most prominent members throughout the next centuries including the Holy Roman Emperors Frederick Barbarossa, Heinrich VI, and Frederick II, under whose rule the Holy Roman Empire took on its greatest territorial extent from 1155 to 1268. Thus, going back to Count Frederick III of Ravensburg in the game, after considering all this, it is likely that Paradox meant to portray that first Hohenstaufen future Duke of Swabia here, as his estimated year of birth also somewhat matches this character's age in the game. So despite the discrepancies in his portrayal, as well as the historical blurriness, this is a very interesting and historically relevant starting location, in which you can play your cards well with the Emperor and other rulers in the region, to eventually climb the feudal ladder to gain the Duchy of Swabia, and strive for even more power from there with future generations. We have yet another future German high noble family right next door, in the county of Zollern. The county of Zollern is ruled in the game by the 16-year-old Count Frederick of the Hohenzollern dynasty, with just one existing family member, his already deceased father, Burkhard. Historical records tell us that Zollern was until 1061 ruled by a Burkhard I, and then at some point in the later 11th century and early 12th century by Frederick I, who could very well have been the son of Burkhard. Frederick is mentioned in the chronicles as a powerful Swabian count and a supporter of the Salian Holy Roman Emperors. Historians have identified his feudal loyalty as the reason for his increase in power in the late 11th century. Frederick of Zollern was sent on diplomatic missions to France by the later Emperor Heinrich V, the son of the in-game Emperor Heinrich IV. He also accompanied Henry V on his Italian campaigns in the 1110s, being mentioned as an advisor to the Emperor in contemporary sources. So whilst it is difficult to confirm this character 100%, Paradox probably made reasonable choices regarding this character's heritage, age, and seat of power. And even if it isn't completely accurate, having this heir of the famous Hohenzollern in the game is important, especially because of the future relevance of this family. They actually came from this area and claim Frederick of Zollern as their ancestor, and the name Hohenzollern comes from the Hohenzollern castle, which was first built in the early 11th century, so before the 1066 Crusader King's starting date. The castle was rebuilt between 1846 and 1867, and is still owned today by the Hohenzollern family. The Hohenzollern family members continuously increased their power over the coming centuries, becoming Margraves of Brandenburg in the 15th century, Dukes of Prussia in the 16th century, and Kings of Prussia in the 18th century. As Prussian kings, they were regularly punching above their weight, finally cementing Prussia as one of the European great powers at the Congress of Vienna in 1815, and uniting Germany in 1871, becoming the German emperors until they were finally deposed after the First World War. So both Wilhelm I, the Kaiser uniting Germany, and Wilhelm II, who led Germany into the First World War, were members of the Hohenzollern family, going back all the way to our humble Count Frederick of Zollern. Another really interesting family playable in the game also originated in Swabia, but is not part of the duchy in the game anymore, namely the Zähringen dynasty. In Crusader Kings, they are represented by Duke Berthold of Carinthia, as well as his sons Count Hermann of Württemberg and Count Berthold of Zurich. Surely, many Crusader Kings players have wondered what the deal was with this disjointed Carinthia in the game. And fascinatingly enough, there is a historical story about it. Apparently, Heinrich III, father of the in-game Emperor Heinrich IV, had promised Swabia to Berthold of Zähringen, but ended up giving it to Rudolf of Rheinfelden, who we covered before. That's why, in exchange for the Duchy of Swabia, Berthold was awarded the Duchy of Carinthia and the Margravate of Verona. As you can see, in the game he now holds his original county of Breisgau with the capital Freiburg, but also a reasonably large domain in Carinthia, nowadays part of Austria, and lands around Verona, nowadays in northern Italy. The fact that even this new domain is separated in the game already gives a hint as to how difficult it would have been to administer this realm. And, well, in fact, historians have pointed out that Berthold of Zähringen was Duke of Carinthia only in name. He was never actually able to exercise his power in his newly awarded domains. So making him out to be this reasonably powerful vassal within the Holy Roman Empire, even directly controlling a number of counties in Verona and Carinthia, is not really an accurate portrayal. However, the Zähringen dynasty did achieve greatness in later centuries, especially with their sub-branch, the House of Baden, which is to this day considered part of the German high nobility. One interesting side note about the Zähringen dynasty is their active policy of settling towns and cities. In German, these are still known as Zähringerstädte. Among these are the southern German cities of Freiburg and Offenburg, the Swiss cities Rheinfelden and Fribourg, and even the Swiss capital of Bern. These Zähringer-founded cities typically have a distinctive design, with a rectangular cross of streets separating the old town into 4 quarters, and the main church being in one of these quarters rather than in the very centre. Finally leaving Swabia and its immediate surroundings, another great house you can play in its infancy is the House of Oldenburg, represented by Count Elglimar of Oldenburg, ruling the county of Oldenburg in the northwest of the game's Duchy of Angria. This 26-year-old small northern Saxon ruler is the first historically verified ancestor of the House of Oldenburg, which rose to prominence when Count Christian I of Oldenburg became King of Denmark in 1448, with the Oldenburg heirs still officially the monarchs of Denmark. We don't have a lot to criticize about Crusader Kings' portrayal of Elglimar, except for his name in the game. Apparently, there is a rather awkward typo. Instead of Eglimar, it should have been Egilmar, likely an old version of the Northern Germanic name Elmar. Just south of the Duchy of Angria, we can find another important European dynasty in its early days, the House of Nassau, represented by Ruprecht of Nassau. Here there is unfortunately more to criticize about the game's portrayal of history than merely a typo. Apparently, the House of Nassau was founded by a Count Dudo Henry of Laurenburg. This Dudo was born in 1060 and was the son of a certain Rupert or Ruprecht, which makes our character in the game sound somewhat reasonable at first glance. However, Ruprecht in the game only has one son, who is called Gautzellen, not Dudo. In addition, according to historical records, Ruprecht was not a count, but rather the Archbishop of Mainz. The castle giving the dynasty its modern name, Nassau Castle in Rhineland-Palatinate, also was built by Dudo and his sons in the early 12th century. Nowadays, the monarchs of both the Netherlands and of Luxembourg are members of the House of Nassau. The final character we want to talk about today is depicted unlanded in the game, which makes him not originally playable, but nonetheless a fascinating historical figure. Erreprando Visconti, who is portrayed in the game as the marshal and knight of Count Oberto Obizzo II of Tortona, and his son Ottone, are the first documented members of the famous Visconti family, an Italian noble house with a long tradition. The evidence we have of them is father and son signing a document together in Milan in 1075, so 9 years after the starting date. Ottone Visconti, who is portrayed as a newborn in CK3, is said to have had a close relationship with the future Emperor Heinrich V, and with the imperial family in general. The Visconti later became lords and eventually even dukes of Milan. Their final ruler, Filippo Maria Visconti, ruled as Duke of Milan from 1412 to 1447, and their cadet branch, the Visconti di Modrone, exist in Milan to this day. The famous 20th century Italian film director, Erprando Visconti, was a member of this family as well, and as you can see, had the same first name as the earliest known member of his house, who you can play as in Crusader Kings 3. Thank you for joining us for yet another video on the Holy Roman Empire's depiction in Crusader Kings 3. As mentioned before, do let us know of any other video games with a historical setting you'd like us to cover in the future. And also, a big thank you to our 2 Patreons for supporting this channel. Link in the description if you would like to join their esteemed ranks. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe for more history in bits.